coffee in hand, the day's first glow. Julie and Julie, early morning show. Fast beats, the headlights scream. Everything's more than it seems. The world is wild, but we're in the know. Cause it's time for the early morning show.
Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your early morning briefing for Thursday, the 5th of September, 2024. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Good morning, Robert. Let's go ahead and jump into Inside the Beltway here. The Department of Justice said that it has disrupted a major Russian influence campaign. I guess, is this the same thing? There's a conservative media group called Tenet Media. It's run by Lauren Chen, and there's some other conservative political commentators who are over there. And they're accusing Tenet Media of what, accepting Russian money to push Russian, they call them disinformation talking points. But what's going on here?
Yeah, good morning, Mike. From what I understand, this is the same case, but the DOJ did not identify Tenet Media as the U.S. side of this. They indicted two Russian individuals, Konstantin Kalashnikov and Elena Afanasieva, and they said they laundered $10 million, about $10 million in payments for both this, and they seized 32 internet domains in what they called Operation Doppelganger. They said this is the name of the Russian influence campaign. I think, regardless of whether, because I've seen a lot of commentary, especially from more conservative people, saying that this is not, this is basically another Russiagate. But I think regardless of whether it's real, which I think is likely, I think what's more important is the timing of unsealing these indictments, because I think it's designed to avoid looking like the DOJ dropping an October surprise on the Trump campaign, but I think is also designed to kind of influence the perception of the election in Americans' minds, because I think this is likely to increase that concept we've talked about for a couple months now called the margin of contestation. And that is the idea that a campaign that loses in the presidential election could use any kind of uncertainties around it, whether it's, foreign malign influence or, invalid ballots, to basically challenge the authenticity of the validity of the election in the media. And I think this is what this is doing, setting the Harris campaign up to do this in the event of a Trump victory in November.
Mm-hmm. Sure seems that way. This does kind of add to the background noise. Did the DOJ, did they say whether there was any material effect on voters here? Otherwise, this just seems like RT is giving potentially millions of dollars to these outlets to say Russia actually not bad. Does it actually have an impact on the election? I mean, that's the big question.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Is the DOJ has not actually provided any, or I don't even know if they can measure like a material effect on votes, because that I looked at Attorney General Merrick Garland and Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco's comments on this. They were at with an election task force meeting yesterday. And yeah, they're basically just said, well, this is amplifying already existing divisions, domestic political divisions in Americans. That seemed to be the major point they were making about why this was an effective foreign malign influence operation.
Mm-hmm. I would also note this drops just a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, I think at most, maybe, of this Chinese spy being arrested in New York as well. And maybe that's not planned, but it sure pushed all that talk on Chinese espionage and influence out of the news cycle. Let's move on here to the roll-up. There's a group called Crypto for Harris, and this is one of the big things that looks like where the Harris campaign is trying to play catch-up on Bitcoin and crypto, but they are scheduled to hold some fundraising events here for Harris. We obviously don't have a lot of specifics on Harris policies, but Trump really seems to be very pro Bitcoin, pro crypto. What can we expect from Harris here?
Well, I think this they said these fundraisers are actually meant to kind of push Harris towards a pro crypto policy, because, like you said, she hasn't actually released a lot of specifics about what she would do if she won, as far as policy goes. And I think this is a group within the larger cryptocurrency industry or community that are pro Harris, that are trying to get to build their. They said they're trying to build their profile with the Harris campaign, and basically lobby to get some kind of pro crypto policies from Harris. I think in the idea of getting more people to vote for her over Trump. I don't. If Harris follows the Biden administration's line on this, I don't see that happening. I don't think they're going to be very pro crypto. I think it has to do with that other thing we talked about a couple weeks ago, where crypto is a threat to administrative state or managerial state control of the financial sector, of the finance infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's move on now. We've been talking about the future of U.S. steel, whether they're going to be bought by this Japanese firm, and apparently Biden is planning on blocking the sale, blocking the purchase of U.S. steel by the Nippon Steel Corporation. What's the big bottom line here, Robert?
Well, they said that President Biden is going to cite national security issues with this purchase, and U.S. Steel said that blocking it is actually going to harm workers in Pennsylvania. So I think this is basically U.S. Steel executives trying to give the Biden administration an incentive not to block the sale, because Pennsylvania is a major swing state, and they're saying this is going to hurt a lot of jobs.
Mm-hmm. All right. Moving on, speaking of this Chinese spy, New York Governor Kathy Hochul asked the Biden administration to expel a Chinese official, and this is stemming from this indictment of the former Hochul aide here. Who is this China? It's the Chinese consulate general. Who exactly is this guy?
Yeah, this is the Chinese consulate general Wang Ping, and he apparently left earlier this week, left the state and returned to China. And Hochul said that she asked for him to be expelled, and the State Department released a statement saying actually this was just the end of his tour. I think this is a situation where Hochul is trying to do damage control on this her former aide's Foreign Agent Registration Act violation charges, while at the same time the Biden administration is trying not to escalate things with China here by letting it appear that they have expelled a Chinese diplomat over this.
Mm-hmm. All right, interesting. Also, on the topic of Biden, he is apparently, according to reports, considering an executive order to restrict the number of asylum claimees allowed. It seems like this is something he could have done 3+ years ago. What's going on?
Well, this is according to people that are inside the Biden administration familiar with this planning. He's actually going to expand this. So the original executive order that he issued in, I think it was June, restricted asylum claims if there were more than 1,500 border crossings per day for the course of a week. And apparently he's considering actually expanding this so that it has to be let fewer than 1,500 crossings over the course of multiple weeks. But there's not a lot of details on this. And from what I understand, the concern from pro-immigration NGOs and activists is that this is cementing a much more conservative border policy. I think this is also an attempt by the Biden administration to kind of bolster the argument for Harris with her sort of turn to the center on immigration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure seems that way. Really a way to undercut some of these attacks by Trump on the Harris campaign. All right. Also, there's a company called Altium Cells LLC, and they recognized an effort by their employees in Spring Hill, Texas, to join the UAW, United Auto Workers. Robert, this is probably part of that pivot towards the South. These big unions have been talking about going in and capturing the South. Was it that plant in Knoxville that successfully organized into a union? There was another one in Tuscaloosa that voted against unionizing. This one's in Spring Hill, Tennessee, getting closer towards the Deep South here.
Yeah, this was, as soon as I saw this, I saw another sort of notch in the belt of the UAW in this Southern strategy they've been engaging in, and for about the last year. So yeah, it looks like they're gaining some ground in these Southern states. because the major block for unionization or the incentive for these companies to block unionization and not voluntarily recognize, or a lot of states like Tennessee, I think Georgia and Alabama have also passed laws basically saying any kind of state tax breaks or incentives for these companies to bring their plants to these states would be basically clawed back if they voluntarily recognized unions. And I think in this case, the Tennessee state government said that this vote for unionization began before that law was passed, so they're not subject to this, which is, I think, likely why they voluntarily recognize the unionization vote.
Mm-hmm. All right, and this matters because we've heard from Shawn Fain and other. Shawn Fain's the president, I think, of UAW. We've heard from others talking about the goal of reunionizing is a first step towards rebuilding political power among these unions. They harken back to the days of the big union when union bosses were not just involved in unionizing and contract negotiations and strikes and negotiating for better deals for workers, but also involved politically. And we've heard a lot from Biden. Harris herself said that they're the most pro-union administration in history. And I think they really look at these unions as a way to build political power. By the way, 2028, on yesterday's show, I talked about why the 2028 election is going to be so consequential, because a number of things are running out. The money in Medicare is running out. There's going to be that is going to be a fiscal election, I think, really, where that election is going to determine, I think, America's fiscal future, because those are some of the first challenges we're going to have to face regarding what do we do when these budgets are running out of money. So it's either print more or go into austerity. I think we're just going to print more. However, May 1st, 2028, that is the big union general strike. They're apparently trying to organize a nationwide general strike May 1st, 2028. It's another reason. I know it's some years off, but it's another reason why I expect 2008 to be another very contentious election. All right, and then finally, let's move here to this latest note from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And this has to do with funding that is actually going to Chinese companies. U.S. taxpayer money essentially going to Chinese companies.
Yeah, what's happening here is the EPA Inspector General said that the EPA is handing out these grants, scientific grants, to research projects, and the Chinese government is engaged in basically a talent recruitment program where all these Chinese national and Chinese American scientists and engineers that are participating in these research projects are then turning around, going to China and handing them this technological and scientific research information. And the EPA Inspector General said apparently since 2008, about 7,000 of these scientists, engineers, finance experts have been recruited as part of this Chinese, what they called a malign foreign talent recruitment program. And yeah, this is very, just generally widespread outside of even just EPA grants. It's very common in university research projects for other agencies, the DoD, to have Chinese national, foreign students as research assistants who then turn around and steal that information that might be unclassified, but is sensitive. And then there was recently this scandal with this organization called the Optica Foundation, which was funded by Huawei, and they were effectively shopping research projects for the Chinese government is what it appeared to be.
Mm-hmm. All right. Seems like lots of money's being thrown around and winding up in China as well, or winding up benefiting Chinese companies or Chinese Communist Party. All right, finally, let's move on here to the last item in Inside the Beltway. And that is a U.S. District Court judge has ruled that the Biden's Parole in Place program continued to be paused until 23rd September. Is that correct?
Correct. And the DHS, they requested that this judge lift that pause because the program was supposed to start about 2 weeks ago. And the judge denied that request and then extended the pause. And this is that parole in place program that would provide an expedited path to citizenship for the spouses and stepchildren of American citizens who are here illegally.
Mm-hmm. And then remind us one more time that it affects 1.3 million or 1.2 million potentially.
Yeah, there's an argument over the number. The Biden administration says 500,000, but in this lawsuit, I think it was the Republican National Committee and the Texas GOP, or in the Texas state government, are saying that this will actually affect about 1.5 million illegal immigrants.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on to the domestic income here. I'll tell you, we continue to see a lot of economic data that is mixed. A lot of people are looking at tomorrow's jobs report as maybe a big pivot moment. That's the big pivot report for how healthy actually is the U.S. economy and what's going to happen here. One thing that we've been following for a while is a contraction in U.S. manufacturing. That typically happens before or heading into a recession, during a recession here. What's the latest from the ISM?
Well, yeah, we're now in the 5th consecutive month of a contraction. So the latest report, they said there was a slight bump of like less than a half a percentage point in the purchasing managers index. Anything less than 50, I think they said it hit 47%, but anything less than 50 is a sign of contraction in manufacturing and a sign of loss of demand. You're looking through this report. There are also some comments from some of these more specific industries, but it seemed like what they were more concerned about was that they expect this to continue, this contraction to continue, but they're actually expecting a rebound after the November election.
They're expecting a rebound after the November election. So they expect U.S. manufacturing to begin expanding again.
Yeah, I think the concern is around any kind of the tariffs, both from the Biden administration that are already being implemented or is going to be implemented soon once the U.S. Trade Representative finalizes how they're going to implement them, and the potential tariffs that Trump has talked about implementing. So I think they're waiting to see who actually wins in November, and I think they expect whether if Harris wins, there might be a rebound in orders, and if Trump wins, there could be potentially continued contraction due to worries over the economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like some of these weakening economic numbers potentially could be blamed on uncertainty around the election, because these are two radically different policies here in general between Trump and Harris. And we've actually heard a lot from manufacturers as well and businesses saying we don't want these large capital expenditures before we understand exactly what our tax policies are and what these domestic and tariff and trade policies are from whoever wins in November. As I said earlier, tomorrow's jobs report, pretty much all eyes are on that. Economists are looking into economic conditions in that report. I'll tell you the general consensus among these investment banks, I read these reports every morning. They all think that a strong jobs number, which they think will happen, will actually allay fears of a recession. And so maybe we actually will see some of that pent-up demand return, more money being spent after the election. I'll tell you, the economic indicators are mixed right now. We are seeing a lot of weakening in some economic data. The yield curve inversion, for instance, that's a very reliable indicator of recession. I think it's predicted 9 of the last 10 since 1970 or so. And that yield curve inversion has de-inverted, and that is pointing to maybe an economic slowdown as opposed to a recession. And then there's also small increases in the unemployment rate. People have talked a lot about the Sahm rule. That is also a strong indicator of recession. Basically, you hit the trough in unemployment, and then when a low of unemployment, and then when unemployment rate starts to tick up, that means more people are losing jobs, and that is historically a solid indicator of recession. The overwhelming consensus right now, though, is that these Fed rate cuts, which almost everyone expects, small rate cuts in September, November, and December, a lot of these investment banks are saying that's going to lead us to a soft landing, or at worst, maybe push recession into next year. But I'll tell you, there's not a whole lot of recession talk among these global research economic firms. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and bring Jared on, and we will skip over to Taiwan in the global sit rep. Taiwan is reporting that China is conducting an amphibious landing exercise across the Strait of Taiwan using these civilian roll-on, roll-off vessels. So this is a big topic for the past several years. If China doesn't have the sea lift capacity militarily to get these troops and equipment over the Taiwan Strait, they're going to use these commercial roll-on, roll-off vessels, which is exactly what they're practicing now. And they're just to take a step back, they have been practicing this. They have been moving equipment via these roll-on, roll-off vessels. We know that because we can see satellite images of military equipment being transported into and out of these so-called ROROs, roll-on, roll-off vessels. Jared, what's going on?
Yes. To add on to that, the ROROs that we normally have seen have always been on a pier. However, for the where this exercise is ongoing and the public images, I've noticed there are no piers in the exercise area here. So this is something we talked about. I think it was earlier this week. It might have been late last week. The Taiwanese Ministry of Defense said that China likely lacks the amphibious landing capability. However, if China is able to actually use these as proper amphibs and not need a pier, then I think that assessment is wrong now, and China does actually have the capability, because that's been the big hang up in my assessment, is that they would have to seize a pier in order to use these things, but it doesn't look like they're going to have to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm. So can these ROROs, the roll-on, roll-off commercial transport ships, can they be retrofitted or modified like a Higgins boat on D-Day? You drive up to the beach, the front ramp tips down, and all the soldiers or equipment or whatever gets pushed out of the front. Is there exactly how could the Chinese use these RORO ships in that capacity, or is that what they're looking at?
So I didn't see anything like that, and I don't think that their draft is quite shallow enough to allow for that. And if you look at the major amphibious warship classes, they don't do that either. What they do is they actually sink a little bit into the water to allow the well deck to fill up, and then their guys go out. What I think is happening here is we know that they have a door that comes down. So I think they're just using it as a ramp and allowing the amphibious capabilities of their landing force to take control from there. But without pictures, I can't give confirmation. That's just how I think it would be done.
Okay. All right. Very, very interesting update there. Let's move over to Japan. One of the things that we've talked about for several years now is Japan ramping up talk of military expansion. They've changed their constitution so that they can begin expanding their military. They've been building new weapons. There's been talk about maybe nuclearizing Japan. And then most recently here from the Japanese Ministry of Defense, it looks like they are accelerating numerous weapons acquisition programs as well. This is very important because Japan is important for two reasons. Number one, Japan may be a primary combatant in this World War III scenario with China, but also Fumio Kishida is going to step down, the prime minister over there, and it's kind of putting a big old question mark on the future of Japan here. So what's going on?
Yes. So on top of accelerating the weapons acquisition programs, they're citing a severe security environment, which is a phrase I have not seen from Japan really any time. They tend to like to use very specific phrasing. And part of their acceleration is they included downgrading their purchase of the Tomahawk missile lot that they were getting from a Block V to a Block 5 to Block 4. Now, this is not going to be a radical difference, but what it does do is allow them to more quickly get them as a stopgap measure. In addition to that, the Japanese just openly said, "Oh, we're producing hypersonic glide vehicles," and they did that in fiscal year 2023, which for Japan is from April 23 to April 24, and they expect to field them as soon as fiscal year 2026. Now, that's a capability that really isn't widely seen among U.S. allies, but here Japan is saying that they're using that as a stopgap to achieve true hypersonic missiles.
Mm-hmm. All right. That is an interesting development. Also, Jared, I can't help but notice over in the chat, on the Early Warning Network chat, they're talking about your sweater. You obviously don't live in the South.
No.
All right.
Yeah, I'm up in Ohio. It's 40 degrees when I wake up now.
Oh, my gosh. All right.
Yeah, unseasonably cold.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it is that time of year. All right, let's move on. We'll stay on Japan, but also shift to Australia. They announced three major developments. It was this 2+2 meeting, which is the two defense ministers and the two foreign ministers here, Japan and Australia. This follows a trend of U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific also getting together, not just with the United States, but with each other to work out these defense and contingency plans vis-a-vis China. What's going on?
Yes. So a couple of the major announcements they made. Japan will send a rotational force alongside the U.S. and Australia to Northern Australia. The Australian reporting said that they would send Marines, so we'll see. Naval infantry from the Japanese. The two forces will also integrate their forces with liaison officers at their joint operation command centers. So basically, have somebody there to explain exactly what's happening from the other side's point of view. That's a very important piece of integration. And the Australian foreign minister announced that both nations would provide assistance to the Philippines directly in response to China's actions in the South China Sea, but she made sure to leave the exact type of assistance undefined. So I think we can expect a lot more interplay in the South China Sea, particularly with all of the encounters that we're seeing from China and the Philippines.
Mm-hmm. And there has been talk of potentially joint patrols or joint resupply missions with the Philippines as they go out and resupply these outposts that are under harassment from China. Could we see Japanese, Australian, U.S. ships escorting these Philippines supply missions?
I think so. I think Japan and Australia are much more likely than the U.S. in the initial phases, just because that would be a bit less inflammatory to the Chinese. The Chinese are very openly anti-American, where while they are anti-Japan and Australia, it's not to the same fervor.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for all that, Jared. And we will now get to your questions here. The first question is from Wayne. Cambodia's defense ministry stated yesterday that the Chinese, the PRC, People's Republic of China, is gifting the Cambodian Navy with 2 warships, raising concerns about the Chinese Communist Party's increased presence in the region. Is this a normal situation? Jared, you follow this much more closely than I do. Cambodia seems to be on the more friendly side with China. I would just also bring up India has also gifted boats to Vietnam. And so is this kind of a tit for tat? I mean, it seems like maybe another line is being drawn. Why is China giving these ships to Cambodia?
So from what I could tell, I did see this. I did take a close look into it, but couldn't tell exactly how this would directly affect the audience, so I left that unreported. But this would give China a major presence, well, a permanent presence down in the heart of the ASEAN economic bloc. Mm-hmm. And I think this goes along with the naval base that they're building down there. It shows that Chinese ships can be taken care of. Cambodia is actually quite close with them. If I remember right, Cambodia, I believe, is the country down there that actually sends its king to get medical services in China. So they're very, very close. And this also allows China to say, hey, look, we can actually start really arming other people's navies. They've been able to send small arms and a few land forces here and there, but it is a very big power projection move to say we can send you proper vessels, and these are frigates, so they're the size of the capital ships for Cambodia.
Mm-hmm. All right. China also arming its neighbors, along with the U.S. arming the Philippines, Taiwan, etc. All right, regarding the Trump sentencing, how many people believe they are going to throw Trump in jail? You know what? That's a really good topic here for wisdom of the crowd here. Robert, we talked about a possible Trump prison sentence. We talked about a possible delay until after the election for the sentencing coming up on the 18th of September. We've talked about maybe putting Trump under house arrest. What say you?
I think it'll be much more clear where Judge Juan Merchan is going after the 16 September hearing, where he's going to outline his response to that Supreme Court immunity decision. I am leaning, not quite greater than 50% chance that he has puts a jail sentence on former President Trump. I think right now, if there is a sentencing, some kind of detention, I think it'll be house arrest more likely. Because I think that a lot of people with influence over this trial see a prison sentence as a risk, because it could give Trump another boost as far as support, not only just among the Republican base, but also potentially independent voters who he did gain with after both the indictment and conviction. And then I would think we talked about it before. I've also seen where Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg his office is kind of backed off on their influence over the sentencing part of this, where I think they sent a letter to Merchant where they said basically the sentencing is up to him. They're not going to have a recommendation.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll tell you, I don't know. I guess I've got to take the more extreme of all the options, the most extreme of all the options. I think Merchant is going to order Trump to prison. And I get this whole blowback. Maybe Democrats don't want the blowback, but I'll tell you, they're kind of in for a penny, in for a pound at this point. Why go all this way just to be seen as giving Trump a slap on the wrist? Basically you would say, well, if you're committing financial crimes, anyone else would be going to prison. I mean, could we see a 90-day prison sentence or a 30-day prison sentence or something like that just to get past the election here? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we could see something like that, like just to get past November election, because that seemed to be the timing of the conviction and indictment, and in a lot of these cases being brought, to where they would not be concluded, too soon, where they wouldn't have an influence, but soon enough that they could potentially get a conviction before the election and effectively influence, voter perception of the Trump campaign. I think we talked about this a couple months ago. Victor Davis Hanson, his argument is that they like you said, they're in for a penny, in for a pound. Like, they have to prevent Trump from taking office again. So one way to do that would be to get a conviction in their mind, to get a conviction, and hope that polling of likely voters that said they would not vote for Trump if he was convicted and sentenced to prison actually does work out.
Mm-hmm. Well, they've built Trump up into this existential threat. Like, oh my goodness, our sacred democracy is going to end. He's going to become the next Hitler if he is reelected here. It just seems to me like when you preface this whole situation with that kind of talk, with that existential threat talk, it seems like you've just go all the way. Just throw the guy in prison. We could be wrong, but I'll tell you, this would bolster this. Jamie Raskin and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, these two Democrats in the House, they've been talking about what is their backstop plan. Basically, they want to pass a law. If Democrats somehow do take the House, they want to pass a law that declares Trump an insurrectionist, and now Trump can't become president. Remind me of exactly what that is.
Yeah, they wanted to pass this bill that would explicitly disqualify Trump under the 14th Amendment insurrection clause from taking office if he did win. And yeah, this would, if he was sentenced to prison over this, I think this would bolster their argument for that, especially if he was sentenced to a long enough time frame that he was still technically, in prison when the inauguration happened or when the new Congress was sat on January 3rd.
Mm-hmm. I just, I look at Biden Harris and I look at the people running the show in the Democrat Party. I don't think they will be satisfied just to eke out a win in a couple of swing states through mail-in ballots. Eke out this win over Trump. I think they want to slam the door. They definitively want to slam the door on the Trump chapter. Even, some of these, I say Republicans, even some of these Republicans say, there's a story, I think in the Politico or maybe the Atlantic, some senior Republican strategist saying, well, a lot of senior Republicans dislike Trump and they want the Trump chapter to be over. They're just not willing to say it. I'm not sure this will close the chapter on Trump. However, a prison sentence they may view a prison sentence as being able to slam the door on Trump in the election. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Next question. Do we really think the jobs report is going to be valid and not revised down later like previously? It may be revised down. I think after this big revision that we saw over the past year to the jobs market, I think they've modified the benchmark, so maybe there will be less of a revision going forward. If they change the benchmark, basically change how they calculate jobs numbers. I don't know. I'll tell you, just reading these investment bank reports, it doesn't seem like a lot of these economists and financial analysts were that concerned about this big downward revision to the jobs market, because they said, even though that number was revised down, the U.S. economy, according to this data, is still adding like on average 170,000 jobs per month or something like that. So they say the jobs market is continued to expand, even though of this downward revision. All right, last question here. Any thoughts on why the price of oil has dropped below $70? Well, economic weakness in Japan, economic weakness in the United States. That would explain a lot of it. You know, Goldman Sachs, someone said the other day, I think actually Robert reported this, according to some Goldman Sachs report, they said that the U.S. GDP would shave off about 5% under Trump if Trump does get elected. And Goldman Sachs was also calling for $100 a barrel oil this year. And so I look at these projections from Goldman Sachs. Really anybody. There's a handful of strategists that I follow, guys that I really like. And I'm sorry, the average Goldman Sachs financial analyst is just not one of them. I don't really put a lot of stock in that. But the biggest reason I think why oil's dropping is because supply and demand, which is not uncommon. All right, everyone. With that, I think please let's address the chat here over on the early morning app. So I've been following the comments about how the chat is kind of wonky. Listen, we'll take a look at this and see if we can rearrange stuff. Otherwise, it looks like you may just have to do picture in picture to watch the show and then also be able to chat in the app. Everyone, with that, that's going to go ahead and do it for today's early morning briefing. Thanks so much for your support. We will be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on this show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.